Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. Welcome to this video. We're going to be talking about addiction. Specifically, I want to talk about how people get addicted to other people, mainly in romantic relationships. But actually, the point of this video is that all addictions basically work on the same principles. And it's because we have initially become disconnected from ourselves. So we feel the presence of the existential void that just follows us around like a ghost as we meander through life. We feel restless, we feel disconnected, we feel that something's missing, we feel like there's more. We just feel this kind of itch that constantly needs scratching, and we don't know how to scratch it because we're disconnected ultimately because of shame, guilt, and trauma from the truth about ourselves. Once we've found ourselves in that state and we don't understand the problem, which is that we just need to reconnect to ourselves by reconnecting to the natural drive that we all have towards wholeness. Once we have that problem, then we try and fill it with things in the world. We think that something out there can become a substitute for the only thing that can help us reconnect to the truth, which is the truth. And so we kind of put it on a pedestal, we start chasing it, money, sex, power, shopping, literally anything. And then it becomes something that we become dependent on. We do that with people as well. Like the dysfunctional romantic relationships that we've all experienced in our lives are often down to that. For whatever reason, we met somebody and we felt that they could fill the void. Probably they felt we could fill the void as well. And it creates this weird enmeshment that feels like bliss initially because we get to escape from all of the mental tension that trying to uphold the illusion of disconnection creates in our lives. And so we can finally have these little moments of intimacy and melting away from all that. But then when the real life creeps back in and we realize that we don't actually accept ourselves and we don't accept this other person, then the shit hits the fan and you end up in this addictive kind of scenario where the relationship is now a gremlin that constantly keeps calling for your attention. It needs to be fed on your energy and your time and your attention. And so I just want to make a video about that as a way of kind of sharing my own stuff, I suppose, or learning some things as I articulate this. But also just so we can look at addiction in general, what it tells us about the void, because there are addictions all over the place. We live in a very addictive society. We're addicted to social media. We're addicted to like money, sex, power, shopping, consumerism, blah, 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 blah. A lot of the time, those addictions and distractions are just the same thing. So let's break this down, see what we can learn, and then maybe life will be awesome. So the main lesson that I want to get across in this video is really simple. Where there is a lack of acceptance or a lack of growth towards acceptance because of ego and mental blocks, because we're clinging on to the self-image that we have been conditioned with and then hypnotized ourselves with because of internalized shame, basically. If there is no acceptance or growth towards acceptance, then there can be no realness, there can be no truth. And that's because the only thing that you can ultimately accept is the truth. If you don't understand that, then you're going to feel the void. The void is the feeling that I already spoke about in the intro to the video, where we just feel restless. We feel like there's more. We can't even really articulate it. It's basically just this itch that can't be scratched and it needs to go. That's all we know. We feel this feeling and we need it to go. And because we don't actually understand most of the time that it's actually just emotional feedback that we become disconnected from ourselves because of childhood shame, guilt, and trauma and all that kind of stuff, then we externalize the problem and we just go through life trying to fill it with things that can never fill it. And that is the main problem, actually, for most of us. We're looking for something real. We're looking for the right thing, which is that connection, but we're looking for it in the wrong place, which is outside of ourselves initially, and in the things in the world that we think are going to be able to fill something that can never be filled, because actually the void doesn't exist. It's just a feeling which is showing you that your attention is going elsewhere, basically, in the wrong direction. So we've all heard the saying that if you're going to be in a relationship, first and foremost, you need to love yourself. If you can't love yourself, then how can you love somebody else? I think that confuses people sometimes because actually love is just acceptance, basically. If you can't accept yourself, that's what we should be saying, then you can't accept somebody else. And because most of us have these emotional blocks, we have these issues where we think that we can't accept ourselves, or that if we do accept ourselves, it's somehow arrogant, or it just feels wrong because we spend so much of our lives not accepting ourselves, then we end up in that trap again, where we try and outsource our self-acceptance into all of these things in the world: money, sex, power, and in the case of this video, other people. It can literally be anything that we try and outsource our self-acceptance to, but most commonly, it's people. And ultimately, the only way to fill the void and to have healthy relationships with other people, either romantically or as friendships, is to work on accepting yourself. If you don't do that, or you can't start moving in that direction, you're never going to have real relationships. And so any relationships that you do enter are ultimately going to become a kind of substitute for the truth, which is the only thing that can help you fill the void. And then once the honeymoon period kind of wears off, you're going to end up in these addictive scenarios where you're just constantly clamoring and trying to control the other person to get that feeling back, that initial feeling of release that comes from meeting somebody who you think is going to be the solution to all your problems, which of course they never can be, because they're just human beings, as are you. And the only way to really solve all your problems is to accept that there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things about life that are difficult. You're not always going to like yourself, but you can always love yourself. And so unconditional acceptance is ultimately the direction that we need to move in. So let me just say a little bit more about that, and then we'll get into how this relates to the void and to relationships as well. Unconditional acceptance basically means, as the name suggests, that we accept ourselves and we accept life no matter what it throws us. If we can do that, then we're always going to be grounded in the truth. And if we're always grounded in the truth, then we're minimizing the odds that the void is going to consume our lives and end up causing us to try and run away from the fear that it brings, the existential dread that it brings, the restlessness, etc., etc. Accepting yourself unconditionally sounds like a really huge, dramatic thing to try and work on cultivating, but actually it just means cultivating a sense of humility, which means that you accept your limits as a human being. So you're going to make mistakes, you don't know everything, you can't control everything, and more importantly, that there are good things about you, of course, but there are also bad things about you. But actually, the good and the bad all kind of come together in a kind of cocktail and allow you to be something beyond good and bad, which I call real. Real just means you accept all of these different things, these different parts of you. And if you're a shame-driven person who is feeling the void, it's almost always because you're blocking the acceptance of some of the bad parts of yourself. Now, the bad parts are subjective anyway. It might be things that we traditionally think of bad in our culture, like your anger and your aggression or your lust or whatever it is. All of these things, they're only bad if you do something bad with them. In themselves, they're just part of the human condition. They're part of what it means to be a real human being. And so as soon as you start judging them, well, that's when you end up blocking their expression, or you just block the energy that they can bring into your life, and you cause a state of inner friction, and that inner friction ends up creating a little box for you to live in, aka the ego, and you end up with all these bad parts of yourself buried away within the depths of your shadow self, within the shadow territory. If you are practicing unconditional self-acceptance, then you can look at these parts and you can acknowledge that they're there, and you can start to integrate them, and you can become more whole. And even though you may not like everything about you, like maybe you're too blunt sometimes, or you're too sarcastic sometimes, or you're too weak in your own opinion sometimes, or whatever it is, you can caveat all of those bad parts of you by saying, right, I do have this part to my personality, to my self, but only sometimes it's just one part of the whole. And if you're working to accept yourself at that level, it means ultimately you're not going to like yourself all the time, or you're not going to like everything about yourself all the time, but you can love yourself all the time, which means you can accept yourself all the time, because like we said, love and acceptance are the same thing. And so ultimately, it's kind of like when you're meditating, you've got that whole idea of the observer and the observed. You are the observer and you're observing your thoughts, which are the observed. It's the same thing. The observer is always connected to that truth, to that wholeness, to that unconditional love, whatever you want to call it, the truth about life. Whilst these things that you observe in your experience of yourself are just temporary, fragmentary things, and they all come together as part of the whole. And so that was a bit of a ramble, but the important thing there is that no matter what you find within yourself, you don't have to like it all of the time, but you can accept it. And if you can accept it, that's when you can decide what you want to do with it. And that is actually an act of love, accepting it without just resisting it or distorting it or trying to hide from it, seeing it in truth, building on that foundation and deciding what you're going to do with it. If you can do that with yourself, then this whole idea of if you love yourself first, you can love other people actually makes sense, because really a relationship is just entering that context with somebody else where, okay, you might not like them all the time or you might not like everything about them, but overall you know that you love them and you're committed to moving forward with them. But if you're driven by the void and the need to fill it through this person, you're never going to be able to do that, and the relationship is just going to be like a really chaotic state ultimately, eventually, that is going to cause friction rather than flow. And so that's why I wanted to spend some time talking about our relationship with ourselves and unconditional acceptance. So if you don't understand that, you're going to feel the void, and then you're going to try and fill it with whoever it is that just ends up being your partner. A simple way to understand how you can cultivate this kind of unconditional self-acceptance is to simply acknowledge the nature of reality itself, which is that human beings, like we said, are not these omnipotent, omniscient creatures who can control everything or that know everything and that are perfect, but that we're perfectly imperfect, as the saying goes, and that we're this cocktail of good and bad parts that are constantly moving around and constantly changing and constantly evolving and increasing in volume or having the volume turned down. But in the sum of those parts, in totality, we are something much bigger. And that bigger thing is our realness. And the realness is always there because what's real is always real. But we sometimes forget that because we get caught up in the world and our programming and our conditioning that stops us from just embracing that truth and flowing with it and constantly bringing it all together in a more real way, which just means that we're constantly moving towards more wholeness instead of fragmentation. Because we know that things are going to change, but that we're kind of able to observe the observed in the way that I was talking about earlier, the easiest way to cultivate self-acceptance at this level is to make a promise to yourself. And the promises are the things that are going to actually change your life. For example, you can make a promise that even in those moments where you find something that may seem bad or that you don't like about yourself, well, you can still love yourself. You can still accept yourself. If you promise to do that and you stick to that promise, because that's obviously what you're supposed to do with the promise, then when these waves arise that are causing you to kind of look at yourself in a light that you may not have been expecting because of your own self-image and all that kind of stuff, then you can promise that you're going to ride through it. And if you do ride through it, because emotions are energy in motion, you get to the other side, you'll integrate whatever that is, and then you can take it and move forward with your vision for your life. And if you do have a vision for your life, well, that is another thing that you can make a promise to yourself about, which is that, okay, day by day, you're going to stick to this promise to keep moving forward with whatever your vision is. And so I wanted to put that out there because all this talk that I may be throwing at you right now, if you've made it this far into the video, is about quite convoluted kind of things. But if we break it down to the basics, we're just saying, okay, we're all good, we're all bad. But if you promise to ride through that, then it'll all end up being real. And the relevance of this to what we're talking about in the video as a whole is that if you can do that with yourself, then you're going to be more equipped to be able to do that in relationships. And you can only do that if you have the truth, if you're prepared to value the truth instead of hiding from the truth. Because if you do that, that's when the void is going to dissolve and you're going to have this real relationship with yourself that you're going to be able to have with other people. And you're going to avoid the addictive nature of relationships because you won't need to distract yourself, but you can use relationships to find yourself and find the other person and find more truth so that you're not actually just spending your life living a life of quiet desperation, as the saying goes. If you can't live in this way, where you make a promise to yourself to accept yourself no matter what, then there is no way on earth that you're going to be able to love somebody else in the same way. People don't like each other all the time. Actually, I think, like, if you end up in a relationship with somebody, it's just the person you dislike the least out of all the other people on the planet. You're still going to dislike them sometimes. And that is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of the way it is. Like, people are all different. We're all growing. We're all changing. The person you get in a relationship with, if you get married to them or something, maybe a totally different person as the relationship changes them and the growth process that you both go through reveals things about them, or life just does what life does and it throws things on our plate. Somebody once said life is one damn thing after another. Some of those one damn things are going to change you fundamentally. And that's why you need to be able to make a promise in the context of a relationship so that you can ride through all that and stay committed and keep growing and keep evolving, just like you would if you accepted yourself. Because most people, many people, I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, but because many people are driven by the void instead of driven by their realness, they don't actually accept the people that they get in relationships with. They don't accept themselves, and so they feel the void, and then they find somebody who they think is a magical fairy dust-sprinkled unicorn who has the solution to all of their problems. And it's just an addiction. An addiction ultimately goes like this. And you can say this about any addiction, in my opinion now. You feel the void because you're shame-driven. You don't understand that the void is just emotional feedback, that you're disconnected from yourself. And so you try and fill it with something out there in the world. It can be anything, literally anything. But the most common ones are money, sex, and power. People like consumerism and shopping. They like social media. They like attention. They like validation. Literally anything can become something that you initially try to fill the void with. And initially, it will give you that release. When you feel the void, because you're disconnected from yourself, you create the box of the ego to live in. And the more you filter life through that box, the more you attach to the ego and the belief systems that stem from it, the more tension you're adding to your experience of yourself. It takes energy to keep that ego in place. And so when something comes along that seems like it can offer a solution or be a panacea to the emotional void that you are feeling, you get the release. You're addicted to shopping and, you spend your money, you get the dopamine buzz, you feel that release. All that tension of the ego is gone, even if for just a moment. You have an amazing one-night stand or something, the release of just finally letting go of all that tension you were carrying. You can get addicted to running. You can get addicted to working out. You can get addicted to anything. A lot of those things are good things. But if they become a substitute for the truth and that connection to yourself and connection to life, then it becomes problematic. And that's exactly what happens with these addictive relationships, these codependent relationships, these infatuations and enmeshments that we find ourselves in with other people. We're going through life. We're detached from our realness. We're detached from our true purpose that stems from that and the inspired action and vision that arises when we are connected to some truth within ourselves. And so we finally meet someone and they probably are also feeling the void. They're also shame-driven and disconnected from themselves. And so we become enmeshed. We feel like finally we can just release ourselves. We can feel free of all that tension. And that release, that initial release, we're going from tension to release, it feels like the truth, but it isn't the truth. It's just a temporary emotional kind of euphoria, let's say, that we feel because we've finally been able to pass this shame, this void onto something else, or find a way of just escaping from it in the short term. Think how powerful that is when you get enmeshed with another human being in that way. Like, it's probably happened to you. Like, I think we all have some experiences like this at some stage. It can either be because we're addicted to the sex itself, or we're addicted to this emotional release and the feeling of intimacy that we get with these people. And I don't want to say that it's not real intimacy. Like, some of those moments may be very real, but if the void is the core thing that's driving us and the core motivation for us to keep chasing that, then the relationship away from those moments is eventually going to become a bit more toxic. And the reason it becomes toxic is because eventually that relationship, these codependent relationships, whatever you want to call them, these addictive relationships that are just distracting us from facing the truth, they become gremlins that need feeding. And by that, all I mean is that you will start to find that reality creeps back in, because that's all that can happen. Reality never goes anywhere. And so the honeymoon period will end, and you're just left with this human being who you thought was the solution to all of your problems, because you put them on a pedestal because of that release from tension that the relationship allowed you to get, because of the chemical reaction between you. And as their humanity creeps in, but you're still attached to the need that you have, and it is a form of neediness, the need for them to fill the void and vice versa, then the gremlin is the withdrawal symptoms, basically. You get withdrawal symptoms. That initial high, that initial buzz of the honeymoon period kind of fades away, but you're still craving that feeling that you had. You're still craving that release. But you can only really, truly get that release on a long-lasting timeline by giving it to yourself, by facing the truth, dissolving the void, and moving with life constantly towards wholeness and connectioning yourself, so that you can actually connect to other people on a real level. And if you don't know that, then you're going to get trapped, because you're going to be trying to fill the void initially, but then you get a second level, which is the gremlin, a kind of void within the void, where you've got this gremlin on your back constantly trying to be fed. When you're not near that person, well, you're going to have that feeling. The gremlin's going to want to be fed. It's, feed me, feed me, feed me. Give me that person, give me that person. You're going to be checking your phone. You're going to be texting nonstop. All those things that people do in these mind-numbing, mind-blowing, mind-destroying relationships are just addiction. They're trying to get that initial feeling of the initial release. And if you don't know that, then you're just going to keep trying to stoke the fires to get that feeling back in an unreal way. But the only way to save that relationship is either to start being real within it and using the relationship as a container for that realness, or if you realize there was not enough realness for that because there is no promise to ride through the like and dislike, then it's time to GTFO, basically. So that was the video about how relationships can become addictive if we don't accept ourselves before we get into the relationship. If we don't accept ourselves unconditionally, which doesn't mean that we think we're perfect, it doesn't mean that we're not growing, it doesn't mean that we're not evolving, it just means we know that we probably have some work to do, but that's okay. We can love ourselves anyway. If we don't try to get to that stage, at the very least, or know that that is something we should be working on, then the relationships that we do get in are highly unlikely to be real ones, because we're going to be using other people basically as a way of filling the void, like I've said a million times now, which can only be filled with the truth itself, which means you have to work on acceptance. If you can't accept yourself at that level, you're never going to be able to accept other people, which is what love, I believe, is all about. And I'm open to being wrong, but if you can't accept somebody else, you can never have a real relationship with them. You're only ever going to have an addiction in order to hide from your own lack of self-acceptance. And that's why that old saying that you can't love somebody else until you love yourself is actually valid, in my opinion. There's so much addictive stuff going on in the world. People trying to distract you on social media. People trying to tell you that it's normal to be craving that feeling of release that you can only really get from the truth. And it's causing people, in my view, to get caught up in all kinds of fucked up, weird relationships that are making them miserable in the long term. We can save these relationships, I think. Not that I've ever done that, because as I said, I'm single, but I do have hope that we can enter relationships with a commitment and a promise to accepting each other no matter what. But that means accepting the truth about life, which is that it keeps changing, and that the promise ultimately is to ride through that change together in a real way rather than an addictive way. And I think that is ultimately what leads to real intimacy, lasting intimacy, instead of just these little bursts that you get of release, which you confuse for the real thing. When you look at life, there are so many things that people do to try and fill the void, like I've said, but it all comes down to the same thing, which is that we become addicted to something that just gives us a hint of the release we can get when we align ourselves with reality and with truth. It's the difference between a short, sharp burst or an explosion of release and a cool kind of even keel as the waves just keep coming and we keep riding them. So that's how I see all that. Hope it helps some people. If you do have an addiction to pretty much anything, it's because you're trying to fill the void. And I literally mean anything. You fill the void, you get the release with whatever it is that you're addicted to. Then you get the gremlin on your back telling you that that release is something that you can constantly get. But of course, because your tolerance to whatever it is you're addicted to goes up, that gets harder and harder and reality creeps back in, blah, blah, blah. So if that helps you, well, that's good news. If it didn't, I apologize because it's been a long-ass video. If anyone wants to talk about any of this stuff, then you can book a call with me on my website, ollyanderson.co.uk/talk. I also have a free 7-day course, the 7-day personality transplant system shock for realness and life purpose. That'll help you to start cultivating this kind of unconditional self-acceptance that I've been talking about and to create a real vision for your life, start moving forwards. I'm going to stop talking, but thank you so much for watching this, and peace to you. Hope that helps.